it's Val here. Welcome back to my channel. Today, since the speed paint covers my OCs drawings, I decided to make a video about creating OCs or creating interesting characters in general. I learned a lot of these things through my art class and incorporated it with my further studies and observations towards other artists' artworks. And I noticed how people often ignore the importance of story and research, which I was one of them as well back then, and skip straight to drawing their OCs out without any sort of thought or planning, which sometimes brings in a future problem where they think their OCs are rather plain and boring, and things kind of get messy afterwards because they're trying to fix the things they were supposed to do before the design even came out. So without further ado, let's dive into today's topic. First and foremost, story. The most important step people often neglect and go straight into the character's design, which is totally fine, but oftentimes people get confused and lost in their creativity afterwards. As in, you get super excited, you create tons of OCs with all sorts of different designs, but when you stop and gather them together, you realize that there's no particular depth or personality to them, which relates each character together along with their world, and they eventually just become some random OC you made. Stories don't have to be super long and complex, especially for those who simply want an OC to represent their account or whatever, and not make a whole webtoon for them, you know? There are two main things to list down when creating a story for your characters. First of all, what's the theme you want to apply to your characters? Do you want to style them in a fantasy genre, such as my OCs who are elves, or horror, a darker theme, or perhaps a more simplistic one, those you relate to your daily life, or even an OC based on you? After determining your theme, start thinking about your character's background. You can write a short story for it, like one of my first character design assignments from school, or if you're looking to make a more complex one, you can write it in bullet points covering the main events of your storyline. Here are some things to break down for your character's background, starting with where they came from, their culture, the environment, etc. Then moving on to their personalities. This is extremely crucial and it should be reflected upon their designs later on. The reason is because people are most interested with characters they can relate to in some sort of way. The character's background and personality are what grows into the audience emotionally and attach them with your characters. Furthermore, if you plan to have more than one OC, or you want to make a more complex story about them, things you can consider during this early stage are each character's relationship with the other, whether they're friends, enemies, rivals, lovers, and so on, and what role they portray in the story itself. Some great examples of online artists I follow for this particular point are Kawanochi and Ketnips. As for Kawanochi, sorry if I pronounced it wrongly, but even though they have very few characters and leaning towards a simpler and perhaps a relatively mainstream romance storyline about a vampire and a human girl, people grow into them due to how the artist portrayed their character's persona and relationships through short strips. Then there's Ketnips, a character Bean, a very simple character who literally looks like a bean in a way, I guess. The artists managed to interest their audience by making short, simple animations which people can relate to Bean himself, and how much impact this point of character backgrounds gives to the audience is very much portrayed to one of my all-time favorite anime, Naruto. One great example you can see from the show is, rather than a perfect character himself, Naruto, who is the main character, is filled with so many gaps people can empathize and relate to in many sorts of ways, and seeing his relationships with other characters in the Naruto universe really helps us understand and grow into his character more, as well as other characters in the show. After you've established your story, you may now start your character design. You can start by searching for references to match the theme you've chosen for your story. It could be a style of fashion you prefer, such as gothic fashion, fantasy, trendy, tech wears, baroque fashion, or whatever suits your personal taste. Or you can be inspired from a certain culture, A great example would be characters from Genshin Impact, where each region has their own national language for the way they dress themselves, such as Mondstadt, inspired by Germany, Liyue by China, Inazuma by Japan, Chechnya by Russia, Fontaine by France, Meru by Egypt, and Natlan by Indigenous American. By doing so, it gives a clearer sense of identity towards the characters themselves and their origin, and hence letting the audience recognize and understand them more. Given the setting you've established for your story, namely where they came from, you can also research what types of fashion people from similar backgrounds, roles, and climates wear. For instance, my OC, they live around a snowy landscape, which means it's very cold, a very cold area, and they need warmth from their clothing, not summer wears. However, given their roles as people exposed to battles and war, they also need to wear something comfortable enough to move around and also protect themselves from harm. As a result, I designed them with some layers of fabric and armors, enough to cover themselves from the cold surrounding them, but also not too stuffy and still giving enough room to allow agile movements. After you've found your references, start designing your character. Find traits to distinguish them from other characters and make them as unique as possible, like some sort of trademark of yours, as well as some traits to reflect their personalities in your design. It could be from their hair color, outfit designs such as ornaments, accessories, colors, patterns, or perhaps their facial features or even tattoos on their body, and so on. And remember, anatomy also plays a huge role here. Needless to say, anatomy is complementary to character designing, and if you're not too familiar with it yet or you're still struggling with it, it's best to do some studies beforehand, because anatomy also plays a part in making your audience comfortable enough and interested in your character's design. And as I've mentioned before in my art style video, I highly suggest you to learn from real life figures as well, because if you argue that you're not looking to pursue a realistic style for your drawings, learning from an anime or cartoon style tutorial is an already simplified subject from the original subject itself, which is realism. As a result, you will never understand what you're trying to draw to its fullest extent, let alone simplify and stylize your own image. Lastly, the color scheme and materials you use on your character's design. Now, what do I mean by materials? You can technically create a character with just a plain t-shirt and short pants like the characters in a webtoon called My Giant Nerd Boyfriend, and focus more on their story. It's actually a really adorable webtoon, especially for those who enjoy slice of life genre such as myself. But if you're looking to make a more unique, interesting, and complex design, especially in most action and fantasy genre, the materials you apply onto your character's designs are crucial to attract the eyes of your audience. Generally, metallic or shiny objects like jewelries attract more attention due to their contrasting values from the fabric or skin textures around them when light reflects onto them. This can be seen very well in Wolop's designs, that even though their characters' outfits are actually quite simple, like a bralette or a cowl neck dress, but by adding gold and metallic jewelries onto them, they add more contrast and highlight to these characters. Hence, it adds more focus onto these characters from the audience, and it makes them more interesting design-wise. Other fabric materials can also be incorporated, such as leathers, fur, laces, silk, cotton, wool, and so on. One of the examples I would refer to for this one is Guwise's designs. As you can see here, they don't use as much jewelries and contrasting metallic textures like Wolop does. On top of that, most of their color schemes land on the monochromatic black and white palette, but even then they managed to make their characters remain interesting by adding different materials for their belts, jackets or coats, crop top, tank top, skinny jeans, and so on. Next, patterns. The easiest way to explain this is through several examples I took from Shaw E, who is one of my biggest influences in art. If you look at the way they designed their characters' clothing, although they do do have both metallic contrast and different fabric materials applied onto their characters. You can see a lot of different patterns as well, such as patterns on their laces, knit stockings, clothing patterns including plaid skirts, sidelines, frillies and ruffles, checkered patterns, puffy pattern jackets, and a lot more. And despite using similar materials sometimes, the patterns used for each part of the outfit's design maintain the character's distinguishability, whilst also adding more language to their designs for the audience to read. Last but not least, color contrast. A great example would be Ross Strauss, whose colors are technically his trademarks. After seeing Willop, Guweiss, and Shaw-E, you can see how Ross's take on characters' designs quite different, that he used a ton of colors, mostly bright colors, instead of monochromatic palette to distinguish each of his characters' traits and their personalities. All in all, everyone's got their own preferences in terms of creating their own characters, but story and character designing are the two inseparable factors to make a good OC of your own. I hope you found this helpful, and as usual, any feedbacks or requests on a certain topic are welcomed on the comment section below, or you can approach me on my social media accounts. And if you'd like to support me and get notified on new uploads, consider subscribing to my channel and hit the bell button. Thank you so much for staying, and I hope to see you guys again on my next videos.